When I retired at 68, I thought the hard part was over. I was wrong. The hard part was just starting. I'm 82 years old. My name is Walter, and I'm going to tell you about the 6 habits that saved what's left of my life. After the first 3 years of retirement nearly took it apart. The first habit was keeping a physical routine even when nothing required it. I retired from the carpentry business in 2007. 68 years old, 45 years in the trade, 3 crews at the peak, work spread across Penobscot County, a reputation I'd spent decades building, and one January morning I handed the last of it off, drove home, walked into this house, sat down in this chair, and thought, now what? I didn't have an answer. For the first 6 months, I kept moving because Helen was still alive, and Helen's days had a structure that mine inherited by proximity. She got up at a certain time. She had things to do. She expected me to be somewhat present for them. So I was. The structure was hers and I borrowed it. Then she got sick, and then, in 2017, she died. And I was 73 years old in a house that had no structure at all. The days came apart. Not dramatically. I wasn't in a crisis anyone could see. I just drifted. I woke when I woke. I ate when I ate. I went to the shop sometimes, and sometimes I didn't. Tuesday felt like Saturday, felt like Thursday. The weeks moved through me rather than me through them. What I didn't understand at the time was what that driftingness was costing. Not just the productivity. I wasn't expecting productivity. The driftingness was costing me something more essential. It was costing me the experience of being in my own day, of inhabiting the hours rather than being moved through them. I rebuilt the routine the way I'd rebuild a damaged floor. Not all at once, one board at a time. The first board was the morning coffee at the kitchen table, every morning. Same time, 6 o'clock, roughly. Same cup, Helen's green one from the fair in Bar Harbor in 1989. Same chair, same window, same cedars outside. 45 minutes, no rushing. That was it. That was the first board. The second was the shop. Not every day at first, 3 days a week. Mornings, 9 to noon. The rule was simple. I had to be in the shop by 9. What I did there didn't matter. I could sand a board that didn't need sanding. I could sharpen tools that were already sharp. I just had to be there at 9. The third was the evening fire. Around 5 o'clock in the winter, later in the summer. I lit the fire and I sat with it for an hour. No television. Just the fire. 3 anchor points, that was the routine. And the routine, the 3 things at their approximate times, giving the day a beginning, a middle, and an end. That was the first thing that saved me. Not because the things themselves were extraordinary, because they gave me something to be in, something to inhabit. Without them, the days had no walls. With them, the days became rooms I could actually live in. I've heard people talk about retirement as freedom, and it is. But freedom without structure is not liberation, it's drift. And drift, sustained long enough, becomes a kind of erasure. The routine was what kept me from being erased. I want to tell you what the drift felt like from the inside, because I think knowing the specific texture of it might help someone recognize it earlier than I did. The drift didn't feel bad at first. That's the thing about it. In the first months of retirement, the formlessness felt like rest, like the long exhale after 45 years of breathing in. I'd wake up with nowhere to be, and it felt earned. I'd eat lunch at 2 in the afternoon because there was no reason not to. I'd go to the shop if I felt like it and not go if I didn't. It felt like vacation. But vacation is finite by design. Vacation is a temporary departure from a structure that you're going to return to. When the structure doesn't come back, when the formlessness is permanent, the body and the mind start to lose their timing. The circadian rhythm that had been trained over decades to certain patterns starts to blur. The appetite changes. The sleep changes. The energy doesn't arrive when it used to because there's nothing for it to arrive for. Around month 7 of retirement, I started waking up tired. Not the tired of having worked hard the previous day. The tired of having not done much. A particular exhaustion that I've since read is common in people who have lost their structure. The body without demands on it becomes less able to meet demands. The muscle, unworked, becomes harder to mobilize. Helen noticed. She didn't say much. She was already in the beginning of the illness that would eventually take her, though we didn't know that yet. But I could see her watching me, watching the version of Walter who didn't know what to do with himself. And I think she worried, in that quiet way she had of worrying about things without saying them directly. I should have built the routine earlier. I should have known. 45 years as a carpenter should have told me that structure is not a cage. Structure is what makes the work possible. The frame doesn't limit the house. The frame is what the house stands on. The 3 anchor points, the coffee, the shop, the fire, those are my frame, and the house of my days stands on them. I want to be specific about this because the general version, get out of the house, sounds obvious and unhelpful. The specific version is harder and more real. After Helen died, my natural pull was inward. The house was where her absence was. But the house was also where it was safest to be with her absence. Outside the house, in the world, there were people who'd ask how I was doing and I'd have to say fine. There were places she and I had gone together. There were ordinary things that would remind me of specific ordinary things about her. And those reminders in public were harder to manage than they were at home. So I stayed home. More and more, I stayed home. And the world got smaller. Not all at once, incrementally. The diner on Saturday mornings felt further away. The hardware store, which I'd gone to twice a week for 30 years, started feeling like an expedition. The distance between the house and the rest of the world. A distance that is mostly psychological, not physical. Since the hardware store is 7 minutes by truck, that distance grew. Helen would have seen it and named it. She had a word for my tendency to shrink. She'd say, "Walter, you're turtling," which was her way of saying I was pulling in and she could see me doing it. And she found it gently ridiculous. She was right to find it gently ridiculous. But she wasn't there to call it out. So I had to call it out myself. What I started doing, slowly, about a year after she died, when I'd begun to understand what was happening to my world, was making one commitment per week that required me to leave the house for something other than errands. Not a big thing. Not a social event with people I had to perform okayness for. Just something. The first Tuesday I tried it, I drove to a state park about 12 miles from the house. I walked for 40 minutes on a trail I hadn't been on in years. I didn't see anyone I knew. I came back to the truck, drove home, made the coffee. That was it. That was Tuesday. But something had happened in the 40 minutes. The world had gotten slightly larger. The radius, as I've called it in other conversations, had extended, even by that small amount. And the extension felt like evidence that the radius could be extended, that I wasn't sealed in, that there was still world outside the house that I could be part of. The one thing per week habit has held. Some weeks it's a walk. Some weeks it's coffee at the diner. Some weeks it's taking something over to the Sullivans or going to a thing I was invited to and would normally decline. The specifics don't matter. What matters is that the world has to be extended at least once a week, deliberately, by my own choice. It keeps the drift from becoming retreat. I want to tell you about what happened the 3rd or 4th week I was doing this, because the first couple of weeks felt artificial, like following a prescription I didn't fully believe in. The 3rd or 4th week, something shifted. I decided that week's outing would be the diner, Saturday morning. I'd been going to that diner on Saturday mornings for 30 years, but I'd stopped in the months after Helen died. It was a thing we'd done together, that diner. She'd have the eggs and I'd have the oatmeal, and we'd take about an hour over it, reading the paper. Not saying much, just being there. After she died, I'd stopped going because the going without her felt like a comparison I didn't want to make. But I went. 4th week of the new habit. I sat down at the counter instead of our usual booth. I ordered the oatmeal. The man behind the counter, a young guy who'd been working there maybe 2 years, said, "Haven't seen you in a while." And I said, "I've been keeping to myself." He nodded. He didn't make a thing of it. He brought the oatmeal. I sat at that counter for about 45 minutes. I watched people come in and out. I heard pieces of 3 or 4 conversations. A man talking to his brother about a problem with a contractor. A woman explaining something to her teenage daughter with the particular patience of someone who has explained the same thing 4 times before. 2 older men my age or past it, talking about a baseball game from 1978 the way men of that era do, with the specific dates and the specific names, as if they'd just watched it. When I left, I sat in the truck for a minute. I noticed I felt less alone than I had when I'd arrived. Not dramatically, but less. The world had been briefly present in the diner, the contractor trouble and the teenage daughter and the 1978 baseball game. None of it was my trouble or my daughter or my game. But it was human. It was people in the middle of their lives. And being near people in the middle of their lives reminded me that there were lives being lived, that the world was still going, that I was still in it. That's what the one outing a week does. It puts you back in the current. Briefly, gently, without requiring too much of you. Just back in the current. I want to say this one carefully because it sounds very simple, and it's actually one of the harder ones. It's also the one I think people do least because it feels like the thing that will hurt the most. After Helen died, there was a period, the first several months, where I stopped saying her name. Not because I wasn't thinking about her. I was thinking about her constantly, but saying the name out loud to someone who was listening felt like touching something too hot, like it would make the reality of the loss more real rather than less. Like if I kept the name in my head, I could somehow keep her there too, protected from the finality of being spoken of in the past tense. So I referred to her indirectly, her when I spoke about her at all, or I simply didn't bring her up, even when something reminded me of her, even when there was a natural moment in a conversation to say, Helen always did it this way, or Helen and I used to go there. What that cost me was the connection to the person who was still very much present in my life. In the house, in the habits, in the way I thought about things. The not saying created a kind of wall between the grief and the world, and walls that keep pain out also keep everything else out. What changed it was David. He was up for a weekend about 8 months after Helen died. We'd been working in the yard, cleaning up the garden, the part of the garden that had been hers, which I'd let go somewhat. And at one point David stopped, looked at the section where she'd planted the lupines, and said, Mom loved these. Not, she loved these. Mom. He said her name, or the name he used for her. And the sky didn't fall. The grief didn't suddenly become unbearable. What happened instead was that she was briefly present, the specific person with the specific love of lupines, in a way that the careful not naming had been preventing. I started saying her name after that. Deliberately. In conversations when she was relevant. Helen used to say. Helen would have thought. Helen loved the way this looks in October. And every time I said it, she was briefly more present rather than less. The naming kept her in the world in a specific way that the not naming was slowly erasing her from. I still say her name, every week, usually several times. And what I've found, 7 years in, is that the saying of it is not the thing that hurts. The not saying is the thing that hurts. The naming keeps her real. The 4th habit was making one thing with my hands every month. I retired from the carpentry trade. I didn't retire from carpentry. That distinction matters, and it took me a while to understand it. When I stopped running the business at 68, I thought I was done with the work. Done in a restful, earned way. I'd spent 45 years with wood. I'd built houses and barns and porches and kitchens and staircases. My hands, had done what they were supposed to do. The trade had given me a life. I thought we were even. But here's what I didn't account for. The trade had also given me my identity. I was a carpenter, not a former carpenter. A carpenter. The work wasn't just what I did, it was who I was. And when I stopped doing it, the who I was got uncertain in a way I hadn't expected. For the first year of retirement, I still went to the shop. But I didn't make anything. I'd go in, putter, rearrange, sharpen things that were already sharp, and come back to the house. The shop became a place I visited rather than a place I worked. And the visiting, the going in without the making, was a hollow thing. The shop without work in it was just a building. What changed this was a request from my granddaughter Lily. She was about 15. She wanted a small bookshelf for her bedroom, Simple, she said. 4 shelves. Nothing fancy. And she asked me to make it. I almost said no. I almost said, I'm retired, Lily. Your father can buy you one. But something in the asking, the specific asking, from a specific person who wanted something made by these specific hands, something in that cut through the retirement excuse. I made the shelf. White pine, simple joinery. 3 days of actual work in the shop, the kind I hadn't done in months. And at the end of the 3 days, when I put the last coat of oil on it and set it upright and looked at it, I felt something I hadn't felt since before I'd retired. The particular satisfaction of a made thing, of wood that was now a shelf, because I'd made it so. Lily took it back to college with her. She still has it. It's moved with her through 3 different apartments. I started making one thing a month after that. Not big things. Cutting boards. A small cradle for the Sullivan's baby. Toy boxes for the other grandchildren. A chair for my sister before she died. Things that were requested or that I could give to people who might use them. The making for its own sake felt insufficient. I needed the thing to go somewhere, to be received, to be used. That receiving is what completed the circuit. One thing a month. It's still the habit. The shop has been the shop again for years now, not a building I visit, but a place where work happens. And the work has kept the carpenter in me alive in a way that simply aging hasn't been able to touch. I want to add something about this habit that I didn't understand until a few years after I'd been practicing it. The making something with your hands is not just about the thing you make. It's about the relationship with time that the making creates. When I'm making something in the shop, when I'm in the middle of actual work, the joinery or the fitting or the final planing of a surface, time has a different quality than it has anywhere else in my day. It moves at the pace of the work, not faster, not slower. At the pace the work needs, and that pace is not mine to set. The wood sets it. The joint sets it. The surface that needs one more pass of the plane before it's right. That sets it. There's something deeply relieving about being in time that you don't control. When you're retired and alone, you control almost all of your time, which sounds like a gift, but total control over time is also total responsibility for time. Every hour that doesn't go well is an hour you could have spent differently. Every afternoon that feels empty is an afternoon you chose to spend that way. In the shop, the time is given to the work. The work decides when it's done. And when the work decides it's done, the afternoon has been fully used, not by me, but by the thing that needed to be made. That surrender, the giving of your time to something that takes what it needs, is one of the things I missed most in the first years of retirement. And it was one of the things the making one thing a month gave back. I've also noticed, over the years, that the making has given me a different relationship to myself than any other activity does. When I'm in the shop and something goes right, when the joint closes tight, when the surface comes smooth, when the thing becomes what it was always going to be, I feel a version of myself that is not diminished by age. Not the 82-year-old who moves slower and hurts more. The carpenter. The specific person who knows how to do this particular thing and does it. That version of me is still here. The work is how I find him. I know what that sounds like. It sounds like the kind of advice you'd read on the back of a greeting card. It sounds small. It sounds like something a person does to make themselves feel better, when feeling better isn't the real problem. Let me tell you what it actually was for me, and why it was one of the 6 things that kept me intact. When Helen died, and in the years that followed, I started losing track of the texture of my days. Not the big things. I could tell you what month it was. I could tell you the broad strokes of my week, but the small specific contents of the ordinary day started to blur. Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday were the same color. The good moments, and there were good moments. There are always good moments even in the worst years. Those were passing through me without leaving a mark. Part of that is grief. Grief flattens things. It takes the texture out. Everything becomes a kind of gray sameness. Not because nothing is happening, but because the grief is so loud that the small things can't quite be heard. What the writing down did was force a kind of attention. Because to write something down, I had to notice it first. I had to identify, at the end of a day, one specific thing that had been worth having. One moment that was, in however small a way, good. Some of them were tiny. The way the ice on the birch tree looked when the sun hit it in the afternoon. A phone call from Susan that made me laugh unexpectedly at something she said. The fact that the truck started on the first try in 14 degrees below zero, which is something I've never taken for granted. The particular smell of the shop on a cold morning when the heat hasn't been on yet. The smell that Helen said was the smell of my whole working life. I found the practice in Helen's things. After she died, I found a green notebook in the cedar chest, a list she'd been keeping for years of things she was grateful for. Hundreds of entries, decades of small noticings, the way the lupines came back every June, the sound of me in the shop, the morning coffee at the table. She'd been doing what I was trying to do. She'd been keeping the days from blurring by naming what was in them. I started my own version on a yellow legal pad in the kitchen drawer. Not a grateful for list exactly, more like, what was actually here today? What the day contained that was worth noting. One thing, at the end of each day. Some days it's hard to find one thing, February days particularly, but I've never had a day, not one, in the years of doing this, where there was genuinely nothing there. Something was always there, even on the bad days, even on the days that felt like mostly gray. The list tells me so. The list is the evidence. When the grief says everything is gray, the list says, look at the entry from last Thursday. There was something on Thursday. There was always something. That something, the dailiness of it, the accumulated weight of the small good things. That is the life. Not the highlights, not the extraordinary moments, the ordinary Tuesdays, each one containing something worth noting. The list made me see that. The sixth habit, and I've saved this one because it's the most personal and the hardest to say plainly, was asking for help before I absolutely needed it. I was raised in a tradition of self-sufficiency. You handled your own business. You didn't ask for help until you'd exhausted every other option. Asking for help was, in the code I grew up with, a kind of admission, not of weakness exactly, but of insufficiency, of not being enough to handle your own life. I carried that code for 7 decades, and the code, in my working years, served me reasonably well. The trade rewards self-sufficiency. You handle the job. You don't call for help until the job requires more hands. You figure it out. But here's what the code did when I was retired and alone and 73 years old in a house that was very quiet. It kept me from reaching out at the moments when reaching out would have made the most difference. It kept me from calling David and saying I'm struggling more than I'm letting on. It kept me from calling Susan and saying I don't know what to do with myself on Tuesdays. It kept me from asking the neighbors whether someone could come by now and then. Not because I needed anything practical, but because the house was very quiet and I needed to hear another voice. I kept telling myself I was managing. Because I was, technically. I was managing the way you manage a leaking roof by putting a bucket under the drip. You're managing, but the roof is still leaking. What changed it was a specific moment that I'm not proud of, but I want to tell it honestly, because I think it's the truest thing I can say about this. It was February, about 16 months after Helen died. I'd been in the house for 11 days straight without meaningful human contact, not because I was sick, because I hadn't gone out and nobody had come. 11 days, and I was sitting at the kitchen table at about 9 in the evening and I noticed I hadn't spoken out loud to another person in 4 days, not even on the phone. 4 days of silence, and I thought, but this is not managing. This is something else. I picked up the phone and I called David. It was 9 o'clock at night. He answered immediately. He said, "Pop, what's wrong?" And I said, "Nothing's wrong. I just need to talk to someone." He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I'm glad you called. We talked for 2 hours, about nothing important, about his work and his kids, and a house he was thinking about buying in Portland, about his mother, about whether I thought the truck would make it through another Maine winter." When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, like I was still connected to the world, like the world still had me in it. I started asking before I absolutely needed to after that. Not in every situation. There are still things I handle alone and prefer to. But in the situations where the alone had gone on too long, where the quiet had become a weight rather than a comfort, in those situations I started calling. Before the 11 days, before the 4 days of silence. The asking before you need to, the calling when you're at 5, not when you're at 0. That changes the nature of the call. At 0, the call is a rescue. At 5, the call is a conversation. And conversations are better than rescues. For both people. Let me be more specific about what asking before you need to actually looks like. Because when I try to describe it in the abstract, it sounds simple. And the practicing of it is not simple. It looks like calling David on a Tuesday when I don't have a reason to call, when there's nothing specific to say, when the truth is just, I've been in the house since Saturday, and the quiet has gotten heavy enough that I need to hear a voice that isn't mine. In the old version of me, that call would have required a reason, a practical question, something I needed from him. Because calling a person just to hear their voice felt like admitting that I needed to hear their voice, and admitting that felt like weakness. What I've come to understand is that the need to hear a familiar voice is not weakness. It's one of the most basic human needs there is. We are built for connection. The need for it doesn't diminish with age. If anything, it intensifies. Because with age, the default circumstances of life are more solitary, and the contrast between solitude and connection becomes more pronounced. The shame around the needing, the code that told me asking was insufficiency. That code was formed in a different context. When you're working, when you're around people all day, when the connection is automatic and constant, you don't feel the need because the need is constantly met. You don't notice water when you're not thirsty. In retirement, in solitude, the thirst is real. And pretending not to be thirsty while dehydrating was the thing that broke me. I still find the calling hard sometimes. The thumb hovers over the phone. The voice in my head that sounds like my father says, "You don't need to call, you're fine." And I've learned to ask that voice, "Are you sure? Are you actually fine? Or are you just performing fine because you were raised to perform it?" Most of the time, when the thumb is hovering, the answer is, call. And the call, every time, without exception. In the years I've been practicing this, the call is better than the not calling, every time. The world is larger after the call. The house is less heavy. The Tuesday becomes a Tuesday where I talked to my son and heard about his week, and said my wife's name and laughed at something unexpected. That's worth a phone call. That's worth the temporary discomfort of admitting I needed to make it. Call before you're at 0. The morning has passed. The coffee cup is cold now on the table beside me. I want to say one final thing about retirement and what it did to me, and what eventually held. Retirement broke me by taking away the things that had told me who I was. The work, the crew, the identity that 45 years in the trade had built, all of that, the whole structure of the person I'd been. It came down at 68, and I wasn't prepared for what was underneath it. What was underneath it, as I found slowly and painfully, and not without cost, was simpler than I'd expected. A man who needed a morning coffee at a particular time. A man who needed to make things with his hands. A man who needed to say his wife's name out loud. A man who needed to write down what the day contained. A man who needed to go somewhere once a week that wasn't the errand. A man who needed to call his son before the silence went on too long. 6 habits, none of them dramatic. None of them requiring anything I didn't already have. But together they gave me back enough of myself to keep going. And the going, at 82, is still going. Still getting up in the morning. Still filling the feeder. Still building things that will outlast me. Still calling David on Sunday and Susan on Thursday. Still writing down the one good thing before I sleep. That's enough. At 82, that's more than enough. I want to say one last thing about the word retirement, because I've been using it the way it's usually used. As the ending of the career, the stopping of the formal work. But I've come to think the word is wrong, or at least incomplete. Retirement isn't a destination, it's a transition. And like most transitions, it asks you to find new answers to old questions. Who are you when the work doesn't define you? What do you do with the hours? Who are the people you give your time to? What are you still building? The 6 habits I found aren't the only answers. They're my answers. You'll have different ones. But I believe there are answers for every person if they're willing to look for them. And the looking, even the willingness to look, even the admission that retirement broke something that needed to be rebuilt, that's the beginning of the finding. It broke me. And then I rebuilt. Not to what I was before. To something different, quieter, smaller in some ways, truer, I think, in others. That's the life I'm living now. And most mornings, by the time the fire is going and the green cup is warm in my hands and the cedars are lit up outside the window, most mornings it's enough. If anything I said today reached you, you can subscribe to walk with me a while longer. I read every comment. Tell me what broke you and what held. I'd like to know. Take care of yourself. Call before you're at 0. Write down the one good thing. The fire's still going. I'll see you next time.